It is a little after 2 in the morning on the 26th of February, 1852, and there are soldiers forming up on the deck of a sinking ship. They form in the dark. There is almost no light, only what the stars give and what spills up from below, and the deck under their boots is already tilting toward the bow. Most of them are young. Many enlisted only weeks ago, drafts for half a dozen different regiments sent out together to a war on the far side of the Cape. They have been at sea a matter of days, and they stand in their ranks on the afterdeck, dressed by their sergeants, and they do not move. Ahead of them, at the ship's side, the women and the children of the ship are being handed down into the boats. The order along the deck is that the soldiers will hold their formation while the boats pull away. They will not rush the falls. They will not swamp the small craft that are carrying the wives and the children to safety. They understand what this means for them because the boats cannot come back, and the ship has minutes left. Every one of the women survives that night. Every one of the children survives, and of the men standing in those ranks, roughly 445 do not. This is the wreck of the troopship Birkenhead. It is the night a phrase entered the language. What follows is what happened and why those men stood still. She was one of the first of her kind, and that is part of the story. HMS Birkenhead was built at the yard of John Laird in the town that shared her name, on the Mersey, and she was launched at the end of 1845. She was iron. That mattered. The Royal Navy of the day was still overwhelmingly a navy of wooden ships, and iron hulls were new and distrusted. She was a paddle steamer, driven by two great side wheels turned by steam engines, with masts and sails as well, in the manner of the age when steam was still learning to be trusted on its own. She had been laid down as a frigate, a fighting ship meant to carry guns. By the time she was finished, the Navy had cooled on iron warships out of a fear that iron sides would splinter under fire, and so she was converted to a troopship. Her guns came out. Her business now was carrying soldiers and horses and stores from Britain to wherever the Empire was fighting. Here is the detail that would decide the night. Her iron hull was divided below the waterline by watertight bulkheads, transverse walls of iron meant to seal one part of the ship off from another so that a flooded compartment need not drown the whole. It was a modern idea and a sound one, but the bulkheads did not run all the way up, and the watertight doors in them were not closed as a matter of routine at sea. A ship could be pierced forward and, if the sea found a way past those partitions, fill from end to end. The safeguard was real. It depended entirely on being used in time. By February of 1852, the Birkenhead was carrying reinforcements to the Eastern Cape, to the frontier war being fought there against the Josa. She had left Cork in early January, called at Simonstown near the tip of Africa to take on coal and fresh water, and on the evening of the 25th of February, she stood out again for the run up the coast to Algoa Bay. Aboard were something close to 640 people. The exact figure is not certain and has never been, because the muster was incomplete and the drafts were mixed. There were the ship's own company under her master, Captain Robert Salmond, a Royal Navy officer of long service. There were the soldiers, drafts drawn from around 10 different regiments, most of them raw, under the senior military officer aboard, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Seton of the 74th Highlanders. And there were the families. Some of the soldiers' wives and children were making the passage with them, perhaps 25 women and 31 children, the exact number again uncertain. They were, by the accounts that survive, an ordinary draft on an ordinary passage. Seton was a lawyer by training, a Scot, a man who had chosen the army over the bar and was known among those who served under him as steady and exact. He had spent the first part of the voyage doing what a careful officer does with green troops. He drilled them, he set them their routines, he made them, over those weeks at sea, into something that could be given an order in the dark and would obey it. The night was calm. The sea was smooth, with a light swell. Visibility was good, the stars out. To make the best speed up the coast, the Birkenhead was steaming close inshore, holding a course that hugged the land about 3 miles off a shoreline that was very poorly charted. She was making some 8 knots. Below, the off-duty soldiers slept in their hammocks in the forward part of the ship, near the bow, above the forward compartments. At around 2 o'clock in the morning, off a headland that carried on the charts the plain warning of a name, Danger Point, the Birkenhead ran onto an uncharted rock. She was making 8 knots when she struck. The rock lay just beneath the surface, unmarked on any chart she carried, and she drove onto it bow first at speed. The impact tore her open along the forward part of the hull, exactly where the sleeping soldiers lay. The sea came in at once and in volume. Many of the men berthed forward were drowned in their hammocks in the first minutes, before they were fully awake, before anyone on deck understood what had happened. Captain Salmond came up and took charge of the ship. Colonel Seton came up and took charge of the soldiers. Salmond ordered the drummer to beat to quarters, and the men who were not already dead below came up onto the deck and formed. Seton gathered his officers around him at the head of the ranks and gave them their instructions in a few words. They were to keep order among the men, whatever came. Salmond tried first to save the ship. He ordered the engines put astern to back her off the rock. It was a natural attempt, and it made things worse. As she came off, the sea drove in through the torn plating with new force, and a second impact tore open more of the bottom aft. The forward bulkhead gave way. Water reached the engine room, and the fires went out, and with the fires went the pumps and the power. From that point, she was not a ship to be saved. She was a wreck settling by the head, and the only question left was the people aboard her. There were, on paper, boats enough for only a fraction of the 640. Of the boats the ship carried, several could not be launched at all. The tackle was painted stiff, or the davits would not turn, or the rush of the list jammed them. In the end, 3 boats got away in usable order. Into them went the women and the children first, handed down from the deck, and then such others as the boats could carry without swamping. Now comes the moment the night is remembered for. Captain Salmond, seeing the ship going, called out to the men that any who could swim should jump into the sea and make for the boats. Colonel Seton countermanded him. Seton understood at once what Salmond's order would cause. If scores of soldiers leapt together and swam for the 3 loaded boats, they would reach the gunwales and cling to them and capsize them, and the women and children already aboard would drown. He stepped in front of his men and told them to stand fast. He asked them not to swim for the boats, and to a man they held. That is the fact at the center of this case. The soldiers of the Birkenhead were ordered to stand still on a sinking deck so that the boats carrying the women and children would not be swamped, and they obeyed, and they died where they stood. There was no panic recorded. There was no rush. The ranks held on the tilting deck until the deck was no longer there. Some 20 minutes after she struck, the Birkenhead broke apart and went down. Her funnel came down. Her masts still stood above the water after the hull was gone, and a number of men climbed the rigging of the mainmast and clung there through the rest of the night. The rest were in the water. The swim to shore was a matter of about 2 miles through a sea known for its sharks, past beds of thick kelp that hindered a swimmer. A number of men drowned. A number were taken by sharks. Others reached the kelp beds and the shore alive, and others still were picked up in the morning from the rigging by a schooner that came on the scene, the Lioness, and by the returning boats. The ship's horses, brought up from below, were driven over the side in the hope they might swim clear and not foul the boats. Some reached the land. By full daylight it was over. Every woman and every child who had been aboard the Birkenhead was alive. Of the roughly 640 souls she had carried, something on the order of 190 survived. The rest, about 445, nearly all of them soldiers, were dead. There were 2 failures that night, and it is worth keeping them separate, because they belong to different men and different causes. The first is why she was lost at all. The rule for a ship on a poorly charted coast at night was the rule of the lead line and of sea room. You sounded as you went, you did not crowd the land in the dark, and you gave an unsurveyed shore a wide berth. The Birkenhead did the opposite. To gain time on the passage, she was held close inshore, about 3 miles off, over ground that no reliable survey had ever covered, at 8 knots in the middle of the night. The rock that opened her was uncharted, but a rock uncharted on a coast known to be badly charted is a foreseeable thing, and the practice of hugging that coast for speed is what put her onto it. The second failure was the boats, and it was not peculiar to this ship. She carried, like most ships of her day, boats for a fraction of the people aboard, and of the few she had, several could not be launched when the moment came for want of maintenance. This was the ordinary condition of the merchant and naval world of 1852. There was no law then that required a ship to carry places for everyone she embarked, and there would not be such a law for 60 years. The Birkenhead was not exceptional in this. She was typical, and the typical case killed most of the men aboard her. Set against those 2 failures is the thing that did not fail, and it is the reason the story survived. The order held. The reason it held is not a matter of the men aboard being braver than other men. Seton had drilled them. The discipline that stood on that deck was built over weeks of routine on the passage out, and it was there to be called on because it had been made in advance. When the arithmetic of the boats became clear, one officer understood it, gave a plain order, and had men beneath him trained to obey a plain order. That is the whole mechanism. It is not a mood, it is a habit put in place before it was needed. The court-martial that followed, held by the Admiralty at Portsmouth aboard HMS Victory in the weeks after, examined the surviving officers and crew. It found the loss to be the result of the ship striking an uncharted rock while standing too near an ill-surveyed shore. It laid no blame on Captain Salmond, who had gone down with his ship, nor on the dead. The evidence of the survivors was consistent on the central point. The men had stood, and the boats had got away, and the women and children were saved because of it. What changed after the Birkenhead was not at first a law. It was a phrase and a custom and a standard of conduct that people afterward measured themselves against. The manner of the wreck was reported across Britain and beyond, and it made a deep impression. The King of Prussia is said to have had an account of it read aloud to his assembled troops. The conduct of the soldiers, standing in their ranks to let the helpless go first, became the pattern of what the age thought it ought to do at a shipwreck. The idea hardened into a rule of the sea that was never written into any statute but was understood everywhere. Women and children first. Decades later, Rudyard Kipling gave it its lasting name in a poem, calling it the Birkenhead Drill, meaning the discipline of standing fast and dying in good order so that others might live. The custom would be invoked at wreck after wreck for the rest of the century and beyond, sometimes honored and sometimes not. The clearest measure of what happened on the Birkenhead is a wreck that answered the same test the other way. In 1854, 2 years later, the American liner Arctic went down off Newfoundland. There the crew took the boats and every woman and every child aboard was lost. Same decade, same test, the reverse answer. Courage was present on both ships. What the Birkenhead had and the Arctic lacked was an order built and drilled before the night it was needed. The harder change, the law that would eventually require enough boats for everyone and drills to fill them, did not come from the Birkenhead. It came slowly across the rest of the century, driven by later losses. What the Birkenhead left was the standard of conduct itself. It set what people believed men ought to do, long before it set what ships were required to carry. Off Danger Point, on the coast of the Western Cape, a memorial stands above the sea where she was lost. There is another at Woodside on the Mersey, near the yard that built her, with the roll of the dead set out regiment by regiment. The names on those rolls are mostly young men who had been soldiers for only a few weeks, from a dozen regiments who were on their way to a war they never reached. Alexander Seton, the officer who understood the arithmetic of the boats and stepped in front of his men, went down with them. He was 38. He had given, in the last 20 minutes of his life, an order that cost him that life and saved every woman and child aboard. The discipline that held on that deck was not a feeling that arrived on the night. It was made in advance, in the ordinary drills of an ordinary voyage, and it was there because someone had put it there. That is the plainest lesson the Birkenhead leaves. Order under those conditions is not summoned, it is prepared. 2 years later, off Cape Race, another ship faced the same test and answered it the other way. The wreck of the Arctic is the companion to this one, and it is already in this catalogue.